Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Stately stream. So today's going to be a quick one, and just to get intros out of the way, I'm David, founder of Stately, creator of XState, and we have Farzad. If you want to introduce
Hey,
yourself.
hey, hey, hey. Yeah, I'm Farzad and I'm a software engineer at XState.
Yeah. And Farzad has been a major part of the latest redesign that we've had in the studio, which is really awesome. In fact, I'll show it off now. This is actually it's pretty, but not the prettiest because we don't have colors. But if we add colors, it just becomes so much prettier. So I just wanted to point that out. Uh, and also, if you didn't know, sorry for the poorly named state. So I'll change this to something meaningful. If you didn't know, we also have annotations. And so this is the little component that I was thinking that Farzad and I could talk about and build on the stream today because it's a pretty simple component. And in fact, it might be one where you might think like, I don't really need a state machine for this. It's just a Boolean flag, whether you're editing or you're not editing. But the idea is that we could switch between this, just a simple text area for editing just markdown. So hey, testing, italics, stuff like that. And then when we focus out of it, it shows the markdown version. And then once we double click, if I double click fast enough, we could edit it. Now I made this as a really, really quick PR because in the default machine, we had a lot of things shoved into the initial state description. And so one of the suggestions was to move it out into an annotation instead so that, we can move it out of the way and we could focus more on the states and transitions. And I thought that that was a really good idea. But our annotation components did not support Markdown. So I made this very, very quick change. And Farzad came along and said, like, hey, there's ways we could improve this. And I said, yeah, sure. Because the way we did it was just, or the way that I did it was just super, super simple. And I created a simple state machine for it too. But us creating a state machine for it allowed us to, add a lot more features. So what do you say we make a markdown component? Is that the logic for that? Let's call this a markdown converter. And I'm going to go ahead and delete that. All right, so basically with this markdown component, we have two states. We have, let's call this reading. In this state, we're reading right now. And then when we double click, we're editing, right? So we have reading and we have editing. And so again, very, very simple state machine where you might think like, okay, could just use Boolean variables for this. And this is when you, I want to say like double click here, but I want to make this event more meaningful. So that's why I just sort of want to say edit. And so that way you could really fit in other ways of transitioning from reading to editing. Maybe it's a keyboard shortcut, or maybe you don't want it to be double click. Maybe you want it to be single click, or you click a specific button, and then you go into this editing state. So I'm going to change this to blue. And then two things can happen from editing. You could either commit the value or, and this is not implemented yet, but I'm just saying in the future, we could decide to cancel. And then we go right back to reading. So does this make sense, or am I missing anything?
Makes sense to me.
All right. Yeah. Simulate this and see that, we could go from reading to editing, commit, cancel, all of that sort of stuff. Okay, so the main question that I posed earlier is, why do we want a state machine for this? And one of the biggest reasons, at least in my opinion, is because with state machines, you could also declaratively manage effects or things that could happen when you transition. So for example, when I go into the editing state, if I double clicked this, notice how, and it seems like a very tiny thing, but notice that I'm already focused directly into this component and I could start typing away and doing whatever I want. And that's because, we're handling that as we're entering the editing state. So I could go here, add an entry action, and say focus input. That way I know that whenever I enter this editing state, the input is going to be focused. Now I do have to add the implementation details and everything for that, but it works. So and I think with commits we obviously it's on blur, so we're not handling that. So I think that that's fine. But yeah, this is our logic, and I think that we could actually take this and start making our component. And I promised this would be a quick stream, so it's exactly what this is going to be. I'm going to switch this toggle to XState v5 beta, and in fact, I'm also going to grab the TypeScript from it. So now we have the ability to, export pretty much everything that we need from this diagram. I'm just going to copy and paste it right into here. And so this is going to import create machine from XState, and we're using XState version 5, by the way. And I'm also using the awesome React Markdown components. So React Markdown, I'll show you just what this is. We've been using it pretty much everywhere in the studio. It's a really, really intuitive, easy to use components where you just put the markdown. Yeah, you put the markdown right inside of React's Markdown, and it just renders as Markdown. There's a lot of options to customize that and everything. So in fact, I'll just show you what that looks like over here. So I'm going to get rid of this. And if I have React's Markdown, and I have some Markdown here, like, hello, this is Markdown. Then we see, hello, this is Markdown. Let me bump up the sizes on that. Probably even more. Okay, yeah. So we have hello, this is Markdown. So we know that our Markdown component works. Sorry, 1 minute. Okay. So next step to do is we just need to import this machine. So let's get this working first of all, and then Farzad, I would love your opinions on how we could really improve this Markdown components, because I know that this is a little, even right now, this is a little too simple. So we need to really improve the logic on our Markdown components. But yeah, so first things first, I am going to grab a couple of things from XState React. So we're going to use machine from XState React. Again, I'm using the beta, so you could install this via npm install XState React at beta. Just leave that up here. And then we could grab the machine and get the state and the send method from there. So const state send equals use machine. And then we already have the machine up here. So let's actually, I'm just going to log or put in h1 the state.value just to see what we get. Okay, cool. We're reading. Checking the comments real quick. Nick says, I find even a state machine without states is very useful for this purpose. XState now becomes an effects management library. And yeah, I really love that. And I think not enough people know that you could use XState without having finite states. Technically, you have one, which is the roots finite state, but that just serves as this catch-all finite state where you could just add event handlers to it and do whatever you want to do. Do you find yourself using that often, Farzad?
Yeah. So I think there are two benefits to doing that. One is it allows you to incrementally adopt states later on in case there are new states in the effect management process that you're modeling. And second reason I usually go for this approach is it's it eliminates the need to have external variables or references to check whether what sort of effects you need to execute, or even what type of event, where is this event originated from to conditionally execute some sort of action. So you can keep that. I mean, you know that already in the XState config, so you don't have to have any sort of external dependencies to check for that. You don't need anything. My point is everything is contained inside the state machine, so it's even easier to not have the states and just have effects in there. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And in fact, a great example of this is going to be this focus input action that we have. One change in XState version 5 beta and, of course, XState React beta is that instead of providing the actions through here, you provide them through, I gave away the hints, machine.provide. And then this is normal XState, by the way. This has nothing to do with XState React. But yeah, you provide the actions here. And then we have this focus input action. So focus input. And then this is, of course, where we could do stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an input ref. And this is just use ref if that auto imports. Awesome. Does. And then we could just, let's put the input. And it's a text area, but I'm going to call it an input anyway. So text area ref equals input ref. And the value. And okay, I'm going to be doing something a little bit sacrilegious here. I am going to, and this is just to demonstrate sort of the point that Nick made and that Farzad made, which is like, we might have external state and XState becomes an effects management library. So, and we will move this into the machine soon, but so I'll just put markdown, set markdown equals use state and hello world. So the initial value of this, or sorry, it's default value, which confuses me. It should be initial value, is going to be our markdown. And then we could just show it in the text area. And font size inherit that. Cool. Now it's nice and big. In fact, let's give it some padding. All right, this is a lot better. So we have our markdown over here, and we could put this markdown directly in here. And then we have on change.
You need to wrap the MD inside curly braces. Line 64.
Line 60. Oh, thanks. That would have confused me. Event, and then we're just going to set MD to event.target.value. Okay. So everything is working pretty well. We have this component where we could switch back and forth, but now we want to actually use those finite states that we created to actually go back and forth. So I'm going to wrap this in a div, and we are just going to do a very simple on double click. And this is what's going to cause that transition from reading to editing. And we see here that on edit, that's when we get to this editing state. We don't need that re-enter false. Doesn't make sense there. So send type, and we have, look, the exports from the studio gives us all of our events, which is really nice, actually. But we're going to go to edit, and then we could say over here that if state.matches reading, I think it's reading. And by the way, these will be strongly typed pretty soon. We just need to make an update to XState v5 in order to allow that state.matches editing. And that. Okay, so now we're in the reading state. So if we double click this, we're in the editing state, and we could edit stuff. And we also need a way to submit this. So I'm just going to do on blur. Sorry, let me scroll up here. Blur. And this is just going to commit the value. So send type, oops, not cancel, commit. So, we're typing, and then we're like, yep, that's what we want. So we exit out, and then we have our markdown stuff. Then we could just keep editing. Yeah, so again, very basic component. Could even add a little styling over here. Border 1 pixel solid black, padding 1 run, just so that it sort of looks like our text area. And let's make this with content. Okay, cool. So now it looks a little better. Still terrible, but better. Text align left. By the way, I apologize for using inline styles, but it's a little bit easier at this point.
They're great. I hate it.
Yeah. But we do have one problem, and you see over here, like when I double click, it doesn't exactly doesn't focus into the text area, and that's because we didn't really add that focus input action. So what we could do is just say input ref dot current dot focus. So also we need to, this is very weird, and use effects sort of solves this, but only by chance. It's very weird because it's going to do this and then it's going to run the effect, but it's going to run the effect synchronously before the component finally renders. But I don't feel like dealing with that, so I'm just putting it in a set timeout. And now it focuses, so that's all fine. Okay, so now that we have our basic, editing markdown components over here, where we could go back and forth between reading and editing, what should we do? What else should we change?
We yet need to add the committing logic or saving the changes.
Right. Yeah. So I'm actually gonna let's change this. So this should actually be markdown. Let's call it a markdown editor, and exports default function app, and we're going to return this markdown editor. So we do want to wait to say like, hey, this changed. So props, we want to say on change and get the value, which is a string, and that's not going to return anything. So now we want to actually reflect that in our state machine. So we could do it over here. By the way, note to self, let's get rid of these re-enters. They're a little redundant. It's not going to break anything, and it's technically true, but we just need to make sure that they're not showing. So yeah, we have on commits target reading, but we also want on commits to actually call on change. So I'm going to say actions on change, and now we could add that over here. So on change, and this time we could read props.on change, and we could just give it the that markdown value that we have over there. Again, right now, this is external states, and we could very easily move it into the machine if you want to. And in fact, it's better to do that because it makes your logic more testable, but you don't necessarily have to do that. So, props on change MD, and now we have to actually add that here. So we're going to say on change equals MD, and then we're just going to alert markdown changed, and just add that markdown. So change this tab. You cannot see the alert, but I promise you it does say markdown changed. Let me change that real quick. So let's imagine that we had const markdown set markdown equals use date, testing, and so just going to put the markdown here. Or actually, it shouldn't be in a pre-tag, but just a p-tag. So markdown. And yeah, so we just set a markdown. All right, cool. Now, when we change stuff, it's actually changed, and we have that on change handler, and everything, by the way, is still contained within this machine. So the machine pretty much holds the entire logic, which includes, or almost the entire logic, which includes the state management and the effects that happen. And we have two effects. We have focus input and on change. So, yeah, let's see. What should we do next?
Do we have a way to cancel the changes?
I don't think so, but I think that's a good thing for us to do. So what would you do first? Let's talk through like how we would have something that's cancelable.
So maybe when you change the content of the markdown, if you press escape, you want that to revert it to the last committed value, something like that. Are we talking about the behavior or
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. And in my mind, this means that we need to keep track of that previous value too, right?
Yeah,
So context, let's just say, we have
we
value.
we want it to be named committed, like the last committed value. We don't want to track all the updates.
Yeah. So let's just call this oh, so you want to call this last committed value, right?
Yeah,
Right.
that enables us to that allows us to later on do validation and revert to that value if it's invalid, something like that too.
Yeah, that makes sense. So in commit, we do want to commit that value. So we have on change, and we're also going to do a little assign. And so we're going to assign the last committed value to uh, context dot value. And then we're going to, just do on change. So what do we do when we are canceling?
We assign back to last committed value.
Right. So the value is just going to be you said the context dot last committed value. Okay, that makes sense to me. Now we need some way, and this is something that's new and much better in XState v5, which is in beta right now. Um, right now we have like these empty strings, but that doesn't make sense, and it gets a little bit awkward because in v4 you have to like provide that to the machine with context and things like that. So instead, XState v5 has this idea of inputs, and so I could destructure it from over here, and we could provide that input inside of here. And this input could be anything that we want. And it's going to be strongly typed. Actually, there's a PR for it. It's going to be strongly typed really soon. So in this case, I'm just going to have the input be a plain string. And we'll default to an empty string if it's not provided. So yeah, the way that we provide the input is we're going to do it inside here, the second argument. So we have input, and this input is just, well, that markdown. I'm actually going to hard code this for now, just to show you. So we have input, hello world, and we're still reading from the markdown state. So I'm just going to comment this out, see everything light up red. And so now I could just read from states.context.value. And does not exist on type. We just need to strongly type that, but just a test. Cool. So we have hello world test. TypeScript is angry, but we will fix that. Now we need some way to actually update that value. So pretty simple too. And actually, it's a lot safer here because we could say that only when we're in the editing state should we actually be able to edit that value. So I'm going to say on change. And we're not going to change the target. We're just going to assign. And we're assigning the value to, let's imagine that it comes from event.value. Simple that way. So now we could, and might be good to add type change value string, just so that we have our events nice and organized over here. Okay, so where was I?
What's the difference between change and edit right now? Those two events.
Good question. So edit is an intent that when I double click, it's like I want to edit this thing. And change is when you're actually changing the value. And we could rename those events, but those are just what I had in mind. So type change, and the value is going to be event.target.value. And it says the default value could not be found, and that's because it now lives on state.context.value. Cool. So now we're double clicking. Could do this, and then Blurring doesn't actually change it for some reason. And type commit. Did I do something wrong? Let's see. Uh, Good evening, test RAM. It is still morning for me. And it's probably evening for Farzad too. All right, so let's see what's happening over here because it's not actually going to reading for some reason.
You are triggering that onChange action, right? With what parameters?
So the event.target.value.
No, not here. The onChange that's on the markdown editor component. Go to the state machine.
Okay.
And look for the commit event.
Mm-hmm.
So you go to reading and you execute two actions. There's onChange, the last one, line 41. So where are we executing this? Like, what's the implementation here?
So the implementation on change we provided over here. This is just calling props. Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, we need to grab that from context.
You're right. You're right. So this is just going to be context.value. Okay. In fact, that fixed the issue. Awesome. And yes, we do have a fix. This is beta software, so we have a fix for that accidentally swallowing that error. In fact, it's probably going to go in today. So yeah, everything is working fine, but we need a way to say like, hey, I actually didn't want to to do this. So we basically want some way to commit to the last value. So I'm going to wrap this in a div, and I'm just going to make a silly button over here where it just says cancel. So now when I double click, we see this very tiny cancel button, which just make that a little bit bigger. So yeah, we double click, and so we could cancel. And actually, what's funny is that this blurs the focus, or sorry, it blurs the input, so it might accidentally commit. So maybe that's not the best idea. Maybe we want to do something else, like listen for an event, like an escape key or something, right?
Yeah, let's do that. We also have a question from Nick.
All right, the question, say this machine was higher up in a global context, away from the input component. What would be the best way to trigger the input.onFocus function? That is a good question. Because this is sort of difficult whether you're working with XState, or even if you're working with any other sort of state management solution, or even no state management solution at all, such as just using normal React. And so the question then becomes like, how do we react to a states change, so that, like, for example, the input is focused when we change states. I mean, having things inside is pretty nice. Trying to think though, and that's why this machine.provide is pretty good. So,
Is there a way in XState v5 to provide more actions to the already provided actions on the machine? Like incrementally adding actions? Like
no.
we will have that focus input in the config, and the rest of the actions implementation will be provided in the React context. We just want to add the implementation for focus input per call site, where the input lives.
I don't think so. I'm not sure, but I'll tell you another way that we could do this too. Like, if we imagine that this is higher up, you could actually use you could use metadata, you could use state tags. It's not that there's no solution, there's a bunch of possible solutions to this. So let's say that we wanted this focus input to happen like whenever we're in the editing state. You could be a little bit more declarative, which I would honestly argue that with focusing an input, it's not a declarative thing. It's very much an imperative thing, because it's a one-time thing where it's like, you need this input to be focused. But you could say something like tags focused or something like that. And so that gives a hint to you that when you have this focus tag, something should happen. So again, imagining that this state machine lived somewhere else completely, we could say, first, let's get whether it's focused or not. Or actually, you know what? I'm just going to do this the easy way. We're just going to do this in a use effect because that's what you would probably do in order to focus this input. Just going to copy that over. And let's give it the state as well. So we could say if state.has tag focused, and that's your way of knowing that, okay, the state changed, it's focused, we should probably focus the input ref. And so you could just do it in there. In fact, I'll comment this out just to show you that this will still work. So now you see the input is still focused and we could continue typing. So again, that's one way of doing it. You could also use metadata, to help you with that too. One big change in XState v5 is that the actions are no longer on the states. So yeah, but that is a pretty good use case. It might be something that we bring back, to be honest, but there are alternative solutions to that.
I would say if you made input reactive, that could update while the machine, like the actor is alive, then you could update the dependencies of the machine. Like input could be a live dependency of the state machine.
Yeah, but then the wiring gets a little tricky because you'd have to pass the input ref into the state machine. And again, this might be a state machine that lives somewhere a lot higher than this component. So, might not be the best idea.
Yeah, you can always send an event to update the registered input element in the machine context.
Yeah. And that's a good thing, is that you do have the flexibility to do all that. But yeah, so for the purposes of this, we're just going to assume that the machine is lower level. But just in short, there is a Nick says, like, yeah, there's a bunch of boilerplate with he said, I have sent a callback function in an event to be called that gets stored in context. Yeah.
So it basically stored the getter element, like a getter that gives it the element back.
Yeah, that gets a little tricky. So because essentially you want the states to signal to you that this event should be executed, but the tricky thing is that, or sorry, this action should be executed, this effect. The tricky thing is that that's a single moment in time, whereas a state is something that's, long lived. So yeah, it's tricky. But anyway, that's one way to do it. I'm sure that there are other ways, but yeah. Okay, so let's get back to pressing the escape key should revert the value. And so we should have a cancel. So I'll use effect for this as well, and then we can move this to an invocation. Use effect. Do you remember the what is the how would you listen for the escape key? I swore I knew this before.
So you could do add event listener on that element or on window.
So input ref current add event listener, and I think it's like key press or something.
Key down.
Key down.
Mm-hmm.
Key down.
It wouldn't matter in this context, but
this is what I do every single time. Like I just log the key and I see what happens. And so this one will just have this, and you probably can't see the console because it's very tiny. But if we're in here and we press, we're not getting anything. Press our current event listener. We have the input ref, so not sure why it's. This is definitely an anti-pattern, but maybe it'll magically work. It magically works, which is very, very weird. But yeah, so yeah, Farzad's right. If we listen to key down, we're going to get that escape key. Yeah, this is so bad. Don't do this. Or do. I mean, basically we're triggering the use effect to listen again when we actually have that input ref.currents. But as far as I know, like this is not supposed to happen.
Yeah.
Like, but anyway, it just happens to work. So we'll fix it later. Anyway, so if event.key is escape, then we want to send type cancel, and that's all. So let's actually try it out. We have hello world test. This is our initial value. So if we change this to something else, and then we press escape, it goes back to hello world test. So actually change this. Now we press tab, and it goes to actually change it. So now if we change it again, I'm like blah, 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 blah. Oh, I pressed tab. Sorry. Okay. This should be reverted. So change, escape. Now it goes back to this should be reverted. So that works. Yeah.
Yeah, and please remember to clean up your subscriptions later. Use effect. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to whoever is watching.
but me too. Yeah, this is sort of this is sort of bad. So actually, let me do that real quick. I'm going to just move this over to a handler, and I'm ignoring the red squigglies because we're just doing a stream. So I'm sure this is like keyboard event or something. And by the way I know that is just by doing it dozens and dozens of times. Okay, I'm not that smart or anything. It's muscle memory at this point. So yeah, I could just put the handler over here and then return input ref dot currents dot remove event listener key down, which is a little bit annoying. Not a fan of that API, but it works.
I think you need to store the ref element, like the current property of that ref, in a variable because it's not going to be available in that cleanup callback.
Oh,
but I mean,
you're right. You're right. So const put L equals input ref dot current, and then you're saying that we could just. Okay. You saved me from a stale closure problem, which is great. As
yeah, I learned that in the wrong way.
Text area elements. Cool. Now we got rid of the red squigglies. Perfect. So we have our cleanup over here, but there's one thing that I really don't like. We talked about centralizing all of our logic inside the state machine, but now we have a little bit of logic that lives outside, and even worse, it lives in the use effect. Yeah, let's actually fix this real quick because this is actually pretty quick to fix. I'm going to actually I don't even need to copy anything really. I'm just going to show you that if we are in editing, and this is the only place where we really should be listening for these keyboard events too. I'm going to invoke, so just invoke, and the source is going to be escape key. That's it. So if we get the escape key, then or actually this is what's going to start the listener and everything, and we're going to make this just a simple callback actor. So now, by the way, let me check this beta version. It's beta 20. Okay, so we just released about an hour ago, so I have to remember because callback actors did change a little bit, and I'll show you what that change is. But now I could add an actor, and so this actor is going to be whatever we called it, escape key. So in escape key, I'm going to grab the from callback function, and the biggest change that we made over here, it's actually a pretty small change, but it does affect your APIs if you're using XState version 5 beta, is that send back, receive, and everything else is destructured from the first argument. So we have send back, receive, and we have a few other goodies like self and things like that. But we're only going to be using send back. So I'm going to do that. And now I could basically just copy and paste this entire thing over here. So Might be undefined, but it's yelling at me for some reason. Oh, or null. So if not input L, return, just to be a little bit safe. We have the handler here. And notice I just copied and pasted pretty much everything here. I'm going to send back this type cancel. So notice all I did was change send to send back over here. And yeah, I could basically get rid of this entire use effect now. So let's see if this works. Changing escape. It doesn't work. I did something wrong. It's probably a timing issue, I want to say.
Could be because input element is not available at the time of invocation.
Yeah, yeah. So
Is it because of the conditional rendering at the bottom and how the v5 beta, like, maybe the state value is not resolved on the very first render phase? I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
Because it didn't really happen in v4.
So it might have still happened in v4, but again, this is just probably a weird React timing issue. But I'm actually going to change things in an even bigger way and just listen to the document body instead, because we're focused on this input, and when you press escape, it should just go back, regardless of where you are. So if I tab out, it should commit, and then if I change, escape should revert it. So I think that's fine.
Are we up for a little challenge, or?
Sure, challenge me.
What if the default value was what if this component was actually controlled from outside?
Ooh, interesting. Okay. So Farzad is saying, let's say that we have onChange, but we also have value, which is a string. Yeah, let's just assume that it's controlled from outside. And yeah, so let's say that this markdown editor, we had, value equals markdown, and we had set md to, testing. Yeah, so trying to think. I mean, I think it could still work. So yeah, we have value, and basically we want to listen to the value changes, and whenever it does change, we want to feed that back into the state machine.
This input value you're passing to the machine, that should come from the value property.
Yeah, so this is props.value. And by the way, this is just so this is a one time only. So you provide the input, even if the value changes, the input's not going to magically change because we've already initialized our machine with that input value. So we need another way, an explicit way of saying, hey, this value changed, please handle it. So what we could do is changing it from the outside is going to both need to change the value and the last committed value, because that's just what we need to do. And this is actually a good example of why we would want to handle this explicitly, because the behavior is a little bit different if it comes from the outside, at least in my view. So if we say on, let's call this external change. I'm going to say actions, assign, and we want to assign both the value and the last committed value. So the value is going to be event.value, and same thing with the last committed value. So last committed value, and now we just have to have the type for that. So external change. Now that's happy. Okay, so now we have to actually just model that external change and listen for that value. And yes, you have to use effect here. So use effect, just a little bit awkward. And we're going to send type external change. And this is going to be our value. And this value comes from the props. So this is just props.value. And we listen to that from here. So props.value. Now, to simulate this, I'm going to add a use effect here. and set timeout, which I'm not cleaning up because, I'm an irresponsible developer. And we are going to change the value. So set MD, hey, look, the value changed. And this is just going to happen just like that. So now if we're editing this, it says, hey, look, the value changed. But we were changing it already. So, and this text area is uncontrolled. And we could change
I
that to
think,
control just to see what happens.
yeah, but I think that behavior looked correct because the external update came before your
Oh,
update.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the
So
problem now.
it's a problem, but it's not a bug. It's just some logic that we haven't modeled. So if I reload this, everything is changing correctly, but then it's like we're still in editing when that happens. And so this is why I say modeling that as an explicit event allows us to control that behavior better, because what if the value changes from the outside, but we're editing it? And this is something that even if you were doing this on your own without any state management library, it's something that you could easily forget. And then the user is in a really weird state where they're like, wait, I'm editing something, but it changed from the outside. And so now I have two conflicting values. I don't know how to resolve that. So what I would do is I would say on external change, we're going to change the value and the last committed value just because it's coming in like Leroy Jenkins. It's saying this value is now this. You can't really do anything about it. It's like an act from God where the value is just changing. But we're also going to go to the reading state. And since this is on the parent, we're targeting the child here with the dot. So now check out this behavior. I think this is a slight improvement. Let me know what you think. Oh, that happened too fast. Double click. Okay. So I didn't do anything here. It changed from the outside, and yeah, now we're in the reading state. What do you think about that?
I think like depending of how you want to, because this is like a standard case of multiplayer editing. Well, you have
Yeah.
collaborative editing, and I just wanted to show that this is super challenging, and modeling it with a state machine can actually help a lot because you have like fine-grained control over what's what, like
Hmm.
the right moments of change. But I think like you could argue how to model this in your product. Like I've seen Google Docs actually calculating the new right cursor for your like your local cursor after the update happens. I've seen VS Code Live Share to actually mess this up and like cause some abnormal buffers inside your text while you never had that. And I think what you have is good. I would prefer to go to editing a state, but start fresh with the new external value.
Okay. Yeah. So let's say that you're a project manager and you said, "Hey, I actually prefer the behavior that you just said." So we wouldn't go
Oh,
to
and
reading or
if I wanted
reading.
to be a real project manager, I would have wanted it yesterday.
Yeah, that's all too true. Um, so let's say that we have actions assigned, but we do want the user to know like, hey, something did change, so we want to select all. And now this is up to us in the components to implement that. So I could just, we have focus input, we have select all, and we could just uh, so now, if I'm trying to, oops, you just saw it happen. Um, oops, I reload the entire thing. But if I'm typing, happened too fast again. Typing, and then whoa, something changed. But now, again, we're handling effects. So we're selecting all of the text and we're making it really clear that the value changed from the outside.
Is the input still focused?
Yeah, it's still focused. So if I reload this and I'm typing, you see what happened?
Yeah.
So it changed just like that. And yeah. Again, hopefully that it's sort of like a bad UX to just change something while someone's editing it. But the cool thing about state machines is that it forces you to think about scenarios like that.
Yeah. I mean, realistically, this is really easier to handle with a state machine than
Yeah.
just have a convoluted mix of variables to
Hmm.
rely on.
Yeah, and I also want to mention that, some people say like, yeah, syncing values is like that come from the outside is, tricky to do with XState and React, but it's just 3 lines. You could write a helper hook, it's 1, 2, 3 lines.
You can't escape complexity.
Exactly. You need to model that somehow, and it's better that you do
Yeah.
it explicitly rather than implicitly. So, and by doing this, by not having those implicit changes affect the state of the state machine, you could even do things where it's like, if you don't want external values to even be represented, I could just delete that, and that's it.
And like at this point, it's really easy to also configure the behavior of this markdown editor whether you want to like return focus to something after commit happened, or even like revert to the last committed value on escape or things like that. And as
Hmm.
David showed, like you can add or incrementally remove features to the state machine while also be able to configure that using the context or even input now in V5. It's much easier.
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah. So
So
just to,
input, I guess input is like, I just had the realization that input is great because it's guaranteed to never update. At least the updates never reflect on this live actor. So it's great for internal like initial dependency injection.
hmm
It
yeah.
used to be awkward to have in context because you could accidentally update it yourself.
It was really awkward. And just being able to edit any context value was pretty unsafe too. So, but yeah, so just to give an overview of everything we did today, we really expanded on the very, very simple state machine that we had. So now when we're in the reading state, when you edit, we're editing, it has the focus tag, and we're invoking the escape key, which means we're listening for the escape key. And so that escape key might send us a cancel event, and then we go back to reading. We could also change at any time. We could commit, which is going to take us back to reading. And we have the behavior where an external change is not going to do anything. It's just going to reassign the type and value, and it's going to execute that select all action. But you could see here that, like, let's say Farzad changes his mind as a project manager and says, like, you know what? Actually, I do think going back to reading makes a lot of sense. Then you're just moving the arrow. You're saying, yep, it should go to reading. And then it looks like that.
Yeah, looks decent.
Yeah. So,
Great example of how complexity grows over time,
oh yeah,
even in the span of an hour.
even for simple components like this, it could grow, but at least with state machines, you have something manageable. Um, and I just want to point out one thing too, like if you're allergic to, full on state machines for simple components like this, then just do me a favor and at the very least, use just enumerated values. So we could just say uh, status set status equals, oops, use states reading. And so now you have reading, you could set the status to editing. And then the way that you do effects, uh, you're synchronizing with the state. So use effect does make a little bit of sense here. Even though it's still a little bit of an awkward pattern for this because there's still fire and forget effects, but you could just switch on the status. So, if status is editing, then you might focus the input. Um, else, you might do something else. But yeah, statuses give you a really nice way of describing every one of the states that the component could be in without having to juggle a lot of Boolean variables. So
It's great as long as you don't want to execute effects in a scenario rather than,
exactly.
yeah.
But in this case, we have a lot of effects to execute. So yeah. And if you didn't notice, one of the optimizations we made, notice how, well, can't notice, but I'll show you here. This listener for the escape key is only going to listen in one state. editing. So
Yep, you don't need to guard against other states inside the handler because it doesn't really need to know how it's invoked. Great. Yeah, I didn't realize that we can actually go that far in this stream. We want to just do like very short stream with like very basic features, but we got too far.
yeah. But it's good. We could take this component to the next level, add lots of features, command enter, validation, async uploading, things like that. But this is pretty good for now. Yeah. So with that, yeah, I think that's good.
Yeah.
All right.
Fun.
Yeah. Thanks for joining us, everyone.
All right. Have a nice day.